No worries.
So, hi, Katie. How have you been?
Hi, Brian. I'm good. How are you?
Oh, looking for a rain like a lot of folks, and hopefully by this time comes out, the recording will make a liar out of me. But other than that, the grass is green. I've got the right amount of cows on the ranch, and we're going to see her through to the end of the year at least.
It's a wonderful thing. It's a good feeling.
So we haven't really caught up for a while. I mean, I did see you down at Grass Fed Exchange down in Fort Worth, and that was great to see you and meet your husband and see your son. That was really special. So tell us where you're at these days.
Yeah, so I am in Cora, Wyoming. It's the southwestern part of the state. We're about 65, 70 miles southeast of Jackson Hole. We actually sit basically in the Wind River Mountain range. We sit right in the foothills here, and basically border forest on two sides of us. So we're right up there against the edge of it, and that's kind of our main base. But we're running right now over by Wheatland and Lusk area, and then also running some cattle in Nebraska and California as well. So I'm all over, but I'm supposed to live in Cora.
So, okay. So what's the operation there in Core look like?
Yeah, so Cora, so Cora is basically a way for us to create value with the livestock that we purchase in other areas of the world, if you will. So what that means, Chorus has excellent, super strong basis. You know, we're pretty close to Nebraska. We're pretty close to that Omaha area. So the closer we can bring cattle up to us, the more value we create. And how we use Cora is basically as a pairing for other areas of the world. Mainly California is where I stockpile a lot of these cattle. We put them together out there. Utah, Idaho, Arizona, Nevada, Oregon, a couple out of Washington, and then some out of California. Stockpile them all right there. And basically how I determine stocking Cora is how much opportunity there is in the market, and how many kind of units in production that's going to translate into on my AUDs or AUMs that I'm going to pull back off of this place while still monitoring the value that that's creating on those animals. So that's basically how we use Cora. And then everything to the east of us, it's all the same thing, except for it's a one-stop shop. So anything that I buy there is typically to the south or to the east, bring them into Nebraska or the eastern part of Wyoming, and run them there and turn cattle a single season there rather than kind of two seasoning cattle, if you will, like we do in Cora.
Okay, now I know you're extremely intelligent and talented. So all these places are leased. Like you didn't just magically appear the money to buy these places. These are all leased places.
I wish I had that ability. No, everything's leased except for Cora. There's a gentleman here who owns this property, and he just owns this Cora, about 12,000 acres we operate on here. And then we have an additional almost 30, well, 25, 27,000 acres of Forest Service and BLM we have leased too. It's all contiguous to the ranch. So it's actually pretty handy. And then everything else, California is leased. I just put that together a couple years ago. The Nebraska deal was new last year. And then where we're at in eastern Wyoming, I'm actually out with Sage Askin. I'm sure you know Sage.
Yeah, we've met.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Anyways, I'm out with Sage out there in Lusk right now. This is our first year, and those steers are doing awesome out there, even though it's bone dry.
So you placed some cattle with Sage and his crew.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I did. Yeah. Well, there's only so many of me. So like the California deal I run, even though I have a crew on the ground there. And then the Nebraska deal, I'm just back and forth a lot. But Sage has been awesome because it's kind of, I think I've checked him twice. So it's been really great. We're also members of the Young Producers Assembly of Stock Growers Association, Wyoming Stock Growers Association here, officers together. So I talk to Sage pretty regularly. So I feel comfortable enough to think that they're doing pretty well with him. So
I've I haven't talked to him in a couple of months. Tell him I said hello
I will. I'll let him know.
next time you visit. So, so tell me, before we got going on the recording, you were talking about, some of your federal grazing situations. So, t- um, the leased land you have, um, well, obviously you talked about the stuff over by Sage. Wheatland, that's probably some more of the same, where you're
Private
leasing
ground.
private
Mhm.
party. And what about the Nebraska and the California?
Nebraska is all private and California is all private. So in Wyoming, that's where we're going to run on federal. Well, and we even run on state ground here too, which the state's not. They're pretty open to whatever management strategies you want to implement. We just get into some pretty um, uh, old school management techniques, if you will, when we're dealing with a lot of our federal grazing permits, with the
Oh, okay.
BLM and with the
So
Forest
what
Service.
are those old school management techniques?
So basically, so the operating procedures for the Forest Service in this area, and I've talked to many people from all kinds of areas, and it seems to be the same. Basically, were written in the 70s. So let's think about the 70s. Let's pile them in, let's not move them, and let's spread them out as far as possible, right? So you have salt grounds that have to be federally approved, that are showing that you're distributing the cattle as much as possible. They do not want bunching. That's like the worst thing that you can do, according to the federal government, is to group cattle and to move them. Um, which we all know is quite antithetical of the truth.
Yes.
Um,
It just, I mean, federal policy 50 years behind reality. It's
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, don't get me wrong. We have a lot of situations where, like, I mean, we would need a camp man to be able to regularly move those cattle. And, I think that's really the direction we need to be going. And that's what we're working with. So we are really blessed in this area. I've never lived anywhere like this, where all of our agencies love to collaborate. So we actually have a collaboration going on. I approached the Forest Service about this. So we had the Forest Service, Sublette County Conservation District, which is our conservation district, Game and Fish, and who's our fourth partner? Oh, me. We all who is it? It's been a long day already. We all go out and we've basically deemed, okay, we all sit down before we go. What are the measurements that are acceptable by the Forest Service to say, okay, we're either measuring change forward or measuring digression, or what is cost effective and time manageable for the conservation district and the state. So we actually got a state grant for this. It's pretty crazy. The state is actually paying attention, kind of thinking, maybe we do need to change up some of this. And unfortunately, the only way that can happen is with NEPA, which is a federal process of full environmental inventory. Basically, Sublette County, for NEPA to actually happen, will be easily 10 to 15 years. So 10 to 15 more years of set stock, scattering, and these landscapes aren't your prairie landscapes that have resiliency, have great soil, and can recover. I mean, we're ranching on granite rock here. Okay. I mean, I joke, I'm like, if we can ranch in Cora, Wyoming, you can ranch anywhere in the world.
what's the yearly precipitation look like in Cora?
13 inches and half of that snowfall.
Okay. And are you dependent on irrigation? Do you have any irrigated pastures there?
Yeah, so we're flood irrigating pretty extensively down on the ranch. To give you an idea, so like our sagebrush pastures, there's about, I would say 10,000 of the deeded acres are sagebrush and 2,000 are probably flood irrigated. Those flood irrigated pastures are equivalent in production to the 10,000 acres of sagebrush.
Sounds about right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It wouldn't take very many pivots and some, sorghum Sudan or BMR or even cover crop mixes to equal the amount of forage that I can grow on all my land.
Yeah, it's well, and what's kind of crazy is, so I've actually looked at doing quite a bit of like broadcasting or intersowing or any of those options in our meadows, and our climate is so harsh. We have about 35 frost-free days that we can't hardly get, yes, yeah, we can't hardly get anything up. So my efforts with cover cropping have not been stellar. Basically, the only thing that I've gotten to come in are different clovers. But we essentially have a domination of meadow foxtail. It's basically what it is, which according to some of the seed people I've talked to, the only thing that can outcompete meadow foxtail is this new like mutant meadow foxtail they bred to, I don't even know, some crazy. Yeah.
Super mutant foxtail that'll outbreed the
Yeah.
foxtail we
Yeah.
don't like, but it'll end up, yeah.
Yeah. So that was not an option. So
why does it seem like we keep trying to invent better grasses and better forages that are just take shit over and are harder to kill?
Well, so okay, so I was like, that's what I said. It was like, okay, so you expect me to plant this, and then once you guys realize maybe in 5 years that this is the worst decision ever because it's like KR Bluestem of South Texas, or something like that. How would I even get rid of it? Well, you could also glyphosate and till. I'm like, no, this is, yeah.
But that's not how the world works.
No. So, anyways, that's basically just a no. So we're pretty much, unfortunately, I mean, we really struggle for some species diversity. We've seen quite a bit now that we have been doing some high density grazing now for several years, versus before it's basically been an anaerobic, flood irrigated duck pond situation under ice cold glacier water for the past 100 years.
Probably a lovely compaction layer and all kinds of microbial activity and fungal activity going on. Yeah.
Yeah. It's, what's amazing though, is just even looking at some meadows that are 2 years ahead of some other meadows that I have at a lower elevation. I mean, they are still lifeless on the west side of this ranch, and the east side is just blooming with life, and it's 500 feet higher up here.
And that's because of
taking the water off and running cattle. And what's really interesting, we actually were this is so fascinating. So I've only ever seen this in Hawaii. Have I run into this phenomenon? I was on Parker Ranch one time, and they were talking about managing for thatch. We don't manage for green grass growth. We manage for thatch so that our cattle are still able to eat. They have enough dry matter. Well, I came in here and was like, we're going to blow this up. We're going to put the 500,000 pounds to the acre. We're going to change all this. And I actually started realizing that my sub table from water for my flood irrigation was so high that if I tore up my cork, is what people call it here, that's about 4 to 6 inches deep. If I tore that up, I would literally have a standing pond under there. It's flowing water. Once you get 4 to 6 inches deep, it's basically flowing water. It's eroded all that material out from under there. It looks like a video game in some places. If you jump on the turf, it will quite literally wave away from you.
So that's just like a thin layer of soil that's pretty saturated on top of the rock.
Basically.
Wow.
And it floats once the water's under it.
That sounds like fun.
It's wild. So we backed it way up, and I took a page out of Parker Ranch's book, and what feels like the tundra compared to that. And I realized, I was like, oh my gosh, we have to manage thatch, not how much I'm grazing, but we need to manage thatch, or I'm going to have cattle sinking. I mean, we were roping cattle out of, like, all you could see was their head and the rest of their body was underground. Take them across something.
Wouldn't take too many days of having to do that before I'd start figuring out a solution real quick.
I caught on real quick. I was like, we're not doing any more of this. So yeah, it's been interesting. We only run like 20 to 35 is really the sweet spot. 20 to 35,000 pounds an acre. That's it. Okay. Any more than that, and I don't think it's good for our setting here.
What's the move frequency at that stock density?
Every day, once a day. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're not moving more than that. I mean, it's hard. I mean, we'll have 2,000 to 3,000 in one herd, so it's a once a day.
Well, all you have to do is just get one to move, and the rest will follow, right?
Sure. No, I hear you. They move. They're just. I find that they don't settle as well, especially our sagebrush. We're doing a lot of day herding. We're doing like these joint monitoring projects I'm talking about. We're out living on horseback with these things. A small pasture is 1,000 acres. So then when you put them in polywire twice a year for a couple weeks, it's
it takes a couple weeks for them to kind of get used to it.
Sure. And they're trained. It's their behavior, the settling, and I think the shock to the gut too, from the sagebrush to the meadow situation and then back up. I think I really noticed a difference in digestion for 4 or 5 days. And it seems if you just kind of give them a day. I mean, I shouldn't say a day. We move them every 12 hours. So I guess that's twice a day. Morning and night, they get moved.
Any rationale behind that? The times for twice a day, just when labor was available?
No, we have, you're never going to want to come to Cora if I keep talking. We have like apocalyptic level mosquitoes. I'm not kidding, from the flood irrigation. So if you move cattle when it's hot and the bugs are up, they'll get so bugged, they'll never settle again. Once they get it in their head that they can get away from those bugs. I mean, you'll watch horses do it too. When we turn horses out, I mean, they will go absolutely insane. So we don't let them out at the heavy bug times, or literally all they'll do is run.
Okay. Interesting. I get another unique challenge to ranching in Cora, Wyoming.
I couldn't figure it out for the longest time. I was like, why are they not settling? I mean, we had people trying horseback to settle them themselves. We used dogs. Anything you can imagine. I started wind rowing. I'm like, maybe they need more dry matter. I'm going to wind row the edges and get them to stop. And nope. And finally, the foreman who'd been here for, since the dawn of time, but thinks we're kind of crazed. He was like, hey, Katie, they're running from the bugs. It's like, oh, okay.
And you wonder how long he watched you struggle holding on to that little nugget.
For forever. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And he just drops it and just walks off. It's like, oh.
Hang on, let me pick my jaw up off the floor and just deal with that.
So when it's 35 or 40 degrees every evening and morning, we move cattle.
That's nice. And that's like right now, like 35 degrees in the morning.
It was 35 to 40.
It was like 75 here this morning.
I know. Nice. And we will only have 30 to 45 days at best of that. Otherwise, you're walking out to a hard frost every morning.
Wow. So you were saying like your meadows are full of that foxtail. Is the sagebrush country? What's the forage like up there? I mean, you say sage, so I'm imagining at least 50% sage, but there's got to be something else.
Oh, so it's really interesting actually, because that's one thing I've really struggled with since coming here is there's not a lot of great documentation of what these landscapes looked like 100 years ago. I mean, the white settlers weren't up this valley. I mean, this valley right here till about 30 to 45, 1930, 1945.
Wow.
The house that I live in was one of the actual houses that was built after the homesteading cabins, and it wasn't built till 62. It's the age of my parents. I mean, it's crazy.
That's wild. Okay, yes. So where I'm at, like settlement really started to happen here. I think 1883 is 1882, 1883 is when the land here was open for settlement, and there were some homesteads. And I've actually flipped through the original abstract for the property that I own here at my house, not anything out on the ranch. I need to do that someday though. Anyway, I've gone back and looked at the original land grants, and I know the history of this area, and most of the people that ended up staying didn't come here until after 1885. There was a huge drought in 1885, and a lot of that first wave of settlers said, screw this, we're out of here. And they left because they had a summer kind of like we're having right now, where it was 105 every day and it didn't rain.
Yeah.
And they couldn't get any crops to grow on the soils that they'd only tilled up 2 or 3 years ago that made several amazing crops, which it probably did when it rained a little bit. So I guess what I'm getting at is we got the train came through in 1906, and it was in the mid 30s. It was Depression era New Deal projects that brought the highway through and they realigned all the roads out here. And I've always kind of took that into perspective because I spent a lot of time on the East Coast in Hampton Roads, where there's literally houses that can be 300 years old. And, traveling around in Colorado, going out for Jeep trips, a lot of that stuff dates back to the 1850s, 1860s, even in the 1890s, for the gold mining. And it's very interesting to hear that there was a pocket of the world in Cora, Wyoming that wasn't even really settled or even seen much by white people until 1920s.
So what's interesting is if you start to look at a lot of these really high elevation communities, like let's say like communities that were probably started for trapping trade, not even cattle. There've been people in the south end of this valley, what we call the desert, 50 miles south of here for 100, 150 years, settling it. What's interesting is as land got gobbled up more, there was a super, super bad winter in 1880 down here that basically wiped out like every cow for 3 counties. There's pictures of snow that was 3-4 stories high everywhere. It was amazing. It looks, you would think that the pictures were edited, except for they're so old, that someone didn't edit this and create this image.
Nobody had Photoshop back then.
Yeah, nobody had the Photoshop. No. But it was interesting because it was like, oh my goodness, we shouldn't just send our cows all the way up into that North country. We should move up there, set up hay meadow, have access to water. That was some of the mentality that fueled the settling as people came up. And it's really interesting. Like if you look in places of, Colorado, Oregon, Idaho, a lot of those communities, once you start getting really high up in there, like why the heck would anybody live at 8,000 feet? My house is nearly at 8,000 feet. That's
usually because the views are really pretty.
Right. Well, why would you bring your cows up here, So, and it's interesting because historically where the cows were run, what they called the mountains was really the foothills that I live in now. And now where we run, we literally on the northern end of our permits, we'll easily bring cattle down from 11, almost 12,000 feet and be scrambling on boulders to bring them down.
So you're the tree line.
They can, oh yeah. And they can walk. It's actually kind of funny. They can walk if they clear, there's one peak, they could walk all the way to Du Bois, Wyoming. There's no fence. We just ride it all.
Well, if you got a 10,000 foot mountain, but range between you and anything else, that will probably work for a fence, I would imagine.
It's pretty effective, but what's not super great is when it's a bunch of yearlings up there and there's no mama cows to keep everybody turned around and at a reasonable height, and let's not scramble up that and all those things. You turn 1,300 yearlings loose up there and they get some crazy ideas.
That's why I don't like to run yearlings too much. I like to stick with pairs or dry cows. And I like to do that because every once in a while the yearlings will go nuts and decide that, well, that fence looks interesting. Let's walk through it. And then you got 2,000 on your neighbors and he's all kind of mad.
Yeah, that was us last week. We had them flip an entire bucking rail fence on a water gap. It was like, oh man, probably 30 yards of fence, but I think everybody was kind of just playing with it, scratching against it, romping around, and they flipped the whole thing over and just left. 2,000 of them. It's a good time.
I got to out myself. So last year, but just a little bit before 7, I was on my way to work. Like I was already out of bed. I was getting all my clothes. I was on my way. I get a phone call. Hey, you got a couple cows out on the road. All right, thanks. I'm on my way. I'll get there when I get there.
Yeah.
And I'm already, okay. So we step it up in a gear and, get moving a little bit. And 2 or 3 minutes later, I get another call. Hey, you got about 20 cows out on the highway. Okay, thank you. I'm on my way. I'll be there as soon as I can. Make it out the door, get in the truck. 3rd phone call. hey, you got about 200 cows headed to Coldwell. Okay, I'm on my way. So I finally get there, and I had about 200 head of clients' cows, and their calves were on the highway, bags packed. Man, they were headed to town. I mean, they weren't running; they were just grazing
Moving.
very
Yeah.
rapidly down the ditches.
Yeah.
So I managed to get up in front of them, got them stopped, and turn around, and head back to the gate. Fortunately, I had a neighbor show up with his feed truck, and he stopped him from going any farther east. I brought the bunch from the west. He flipped his siren on and sucked him right back through the gate. Like, whoo, thank you. So what I'm not saying is that gate was a little bit questionable to begin with, because it was a gate that burned up in the wildfire 2016.
Mm.
We got back through it and got the corner reset. Got a nice steel corner there. Everything's great. Somehow that got missed on one or two of my big gate building rounds.
Mm.
And I had just kind of mumbled it together, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
And it was kind of looked a lot more substantial than it was. They were just there at a cool morning, and no reason why they were there, because it's like just a gate kind of in the middle of a row of fence. There's
Just
no reason why they were there, but there they were, something pressed up against that fence, bug, insect pressure, who knows. 200 cows in 15 minutes out on the highway.
Jeez. Yeah, the highway thing, I can't. Oof. I would have trouble sleeping.
I do sometimes, especially when they're next to the highway, and when it's some of my half escape artist Corrientes that,
Yeah.
Have you've been around many Corrientes?
I unfortunately was 3 years ago. Mhm.
Unfortunately. Okay, we got to hear this story.
Well, long story short, we kind of had a rogue order buyer.
Okay.
And not
Anybody
only
we
were they
know?
Corianis, they were half Charolais, half Coriani. So they could travel, but they were also very strong. And honest to goodness, there was one in particular was like, I'm going to shoot him before the end of this season if he doesn't quit leading just rebellion after rebellion. I mean, they were horrible, but we ended up actually finally, there were like, I don't know, a dozen or two that I was like, this is enough. And we whacked him out of the herd and took him to the sale barn, and it was much better after that, but it was horrible.
I've always been told that those half Charolais Corriente calves, those smoked calves, grow really well. Do you have anything to say about that?
No, they really do. Well, I love a smoky. Probably my favorite thing to run is a smoky steer. If the Corriente Charolais cross, if the horns are managed on them, and all of those issues, I'm fine. But I really like an Angus cow with a Charolais bull. That's probably my favorite animal. They will outperform, down south, up here, everywhere I've been, they will outperform everybody else. And the other thing I really like about them, they have good feet, I've found. They travel well. They don't get brisket up here. That's another big thing. Never had one die from brisket. They're much hardier animals. I really like them.
Okay. I probably have all my black baldy friends rolling their eyes right now, but that's okay. Everybody's entitled to their preference.
That's right. Hey, and you know what? When they weigh 900 pounds or 1,000 pounds, people are not that worried that they're not, that they're Charolais at that point. Unless you got all black, you may as well have some smoky steers in there. So they create a lot of value.
Yeah, you like a bigger cow than I do. And I think in mountain country, in a cooler climate, you can have a bigger cow.
Yeah. The big thing is they have to be able to travel. It's so steep here. They have to be able to travel. And to be perfectly honest, Brian, I don't really have the luxury to, I got to put together so many cattle so fast in such a short period of time. I don't have the luxury to necessarily be choosy at what weight I think that steer is going to mature out at. I'm mostly just looking, is he green right now? Is he going to live? Does he have capacity? Would be my only physical requirement. Does he have that depth in his flank? You
Okay.
know, I don't want him to look like a rangy 800-pound cow, even if that's what he's out of. I don't want him to look like that.
Just don't look at my background too close.
Hey, if I was running cows, I'd be there all day. I absolutely hear you, but it's hard to sell their babies sometimes.
So would you say that you're kind of running a backgrounder type operation?
Um, not so you know what, that's interesting. Not necessarily. So in the east, like those Nebraska area cattle south of there, La Junta, Salina, I'll buy some cattle out of Salina. Um, those cattle I'll actually background there in a yard in Nebraska and a lot there, and then we'll get them out on some cover crops and corn stalks and various things. In the West, this is what gets really interesting. I've never been in a situation where it pays to buy weaned cattle, but I buy weaned cattle out there. Um, just that how rough that country is out there and the kind of the ground that I have leased, it creates a lot more value to me to buy them. Like normally I've heard the rule of thumb, you know, if they're only 10 cents up, buy them every time. Those weaned calves are 10 cents up from unweaned. But I've found that I really can afford to give like 13 or 14 and I'm still coming out ahead.
Okay.
In performance, head days are just everything for me on kind of how these lease arrangements work out there.
What? So where is the ranch you have leased in California? It sounds like it's kind of maybe up north and up in the high country.
It's in the high country, but it's actually in the southern end of the Sierras. It's down by Fresno. So it's kind of south central-ish California. But it's basically right up against Yosemite. It's right
That's
in that part of the world.
I can see why you like to drive out there and check it out.
It's well, and you have to remember there's also 6 foot of snow and it's, you know, 15 degrees blowing 40 here in Cora. So we like to go to California. But yeah, it's really beautiful. But I'm telling you, when I went to look at this lease, honest to goodness, I was like, how are you ever going to get a yearling out of here? And 2, how is a yearling ever going to make a living? I mean, knee-jerk reaction, I would have said this thing needed to be stocked with goats. But they somehow do it.
And you have a labor team out there that I'm sorry, I'm
Mhm.
sure you said it before.
No, you're fine. Yeah. So we have, let me think, there's a foreman and 3 guys. And then to get out of that thing, though, is usually a crew of a dozen to a dozen and a half every day. And then we also fly a helicopter.
That sounds
Mhm.
cheap.
Well, I've actually, so this is a funny story, but there's a neighbor who he kind of is a young guy that likes to get some fancy toys. And he bought himself this helicopter. It's like the MASH style helicopter. Like you could
Okay.
die in this thing. It's the glass orb, you know.
I
It's
know
super
exactly
dangerous.
what you're talking about. I wish I could afford one. I know how much they cost and how much gas they
Yeah.
burn an hour.
Yeah. So, anyways, he just likes to go and fly this thing and kind of is always wanting somebody to go with him. I have never, knock on wood, I've never paid this guy except for like a case of beer. It's crazy. He just likes to go fly. And like we built a whole bunch of fence out there and we were trying to figure out how we could even get the rolls of wire out there. I mean, this country is that rough because we couldn't pack enough in horseback. And it was like, what are we going to do? And he was like, well, I'll just take it up there in the helicopter. And this guy, Tim, he works for me. He gets up there and comes back down and his eyes are like enormous. And I was like, Tim, what's the matter? He goes, well, got up there and the pilot told me I better throw it for all I was worth because if it hit the skidder, we would go down for sure. It's like, what? So he said, I'm hanging on with the door open on the side of this thing, got a leg hooked in, you know, not tied on, you know, all these things. I'm like, oh, this is such a nightmare. Please don't tell me that you will ever do that again. We have to come up with some safety protocols. And he was like, I think we should. So, yeah, I bet you do. So yeah,
I have this image in my head of like him sitting in a helicopter with like 3 rolls of barbed wire on his lap. And they get to the spot and he's got to like hold the door
throw him
open and
down.
pitch
Yeah.
him out.
Yeah. I mean, and Tim literally weighs, I bet you 140 pounds soaking wet, you know, and he's supposed to be throwing giant rolls of wire off the helicopter. It's like, oh my gosh, you guys. Yeah,
I don't even know what a roll of barbed wire weighs.
a lot. I for sure could not throw one from chest level far enough out. There's no way.
That would be work.
It's
That would definitely be a challenge.
yeah. 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 Poor Tim. He was not about it. So we've got to come up with a new plan. Free or not, I think it's still not cheap enough if something happens. So
Yeah, for sure. It's hard to put a cost on a human life.
yes.
So
Yeah.
what sounds like you're on horseback all the time.
Yeah. So well, yeah, my winters are basically, I mean, 6 to 7 months out of the year, I am phone and computer nonstop, trading, watching sales, watching markets. That's all I do. And then I would say there's about 5 months when we're here in Cora, I'm horseback a bunch. Like, I mean, I'm horseback some in California, but it's like a day or two once a month, not anything crazy. But here in Cora, we make a lot of miles, and our big thing is managing the big herd, and it's super challenging in these sagebrush ecosystems. Super challenging. I mean, a mistake here is something my kids could see, when they're outside, versus a mistake with a big herd, Oklahoma, Texas, something I'm used to. You can probably fix it in what, 4 or 5 years at most.
It depends on the mistake.
Sure, but it's doable, right? It's not
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh, I'll never fix this in my lifetime. That's what it is up here. I
When
mean,
you get to
it's
those super dry, cold environments,
mhm,
it takes so long for the biological process to do their job. Like
yes,
what I have in my mind is like the Arctic tundra down in Colorado, way up
yes,
high in the San Juan, 12, 13,000 feet.
yep,
It could take 25 years for the plants to recover from a footstep or from a
yes,
tire track.
yes. Yeah, I'm actually shifting to, I think at most our uplands here need grazed once every 3 years. And I mean, you'll be trotting around out there and you'll literally ride past a cow pie, and I'm like, I think that thing's probably older than me. And that's not an exaggeration. I mean, it's quite literally just that slow and that dry, and there's just not topsoil in a lot of places. I mean, we're literally riding around on granite, oh my gosh,
Granite?
granite gravel. That was a sticky one. Granite gravel, up here. So, and it's a lot of miles. I mean, that's something you were alluding to the other day. I ran the tracker horseback, and this was a particularly long day, but we went 21 miles before we stepped off. I was beat
That's
down.
that's a long day.
It is. It is. But typical would be more in that 10, 10 to 12, and I'll be back in the office for 3 or 4 hours in the afternoon.
10 to 12 miles in a side by side, 3, 4 hours in the office in the afternoon. That sounds very familiar.
Not quite a side by side, but
Yeah.
yeah.
I have a roof that keeps the sun, at least a little bit of the dust and most of the rain off.
That's a good thing. That man, living up here, everything is tougher. Every plant, every animal, every person. That was one thing. We had friends come visit this weekend, and they're really good friends. But the wife was like, Katie, I'm saying this because I really care, but I think you need to start using some eye cream since moving up here. And I was like, what are you talking about? She was like, you look so much older in the few years that you guys have moved up here. And I was like, wow. I mean, I really kind of looked at some pictures and I was like, this is the sun at 8,000 feet. I mean, I will get a sunburn. I mean, I'm wearing short sleeves today, so I shouldn't say that I've been inside most of the day, but I'll wear, a scarf, gloves, hat, the whole shebang all day long. But if you don't have that on, you could get a sunburn before 8 a.m. I'm not kidding, because the sun's up by 5 in the summer, like broad daylight at 5.
And it probably doesn't get dark there till what, 10:30 right now?
Yep, sunsets at about 10:23 or 24 right now.
Well, that's
Yeah.
fun. A little farther north and you almost have daylight.
It's interesting, because I wonder about it a lot as far as how many heat units we actually are getting. Because I always talk about and think about how much colder it is up here and wonder if heat units is part of our problem. but it would be super interesting. I'm sure someone's done it somewhere, but I haven't been able to find it. Compare heat units in central Texas, central Oklahoma to heat units up here, and I bet they would be pretty close.
Like heat units, like meaning radiative power from the sun.
Yeah, like available energy for plants to grow.
Oh, I think there's more at high altitude.
Yeah, and yes. And so again, it goes back to the factors of, because that's what you always hear people say up here. Well, it's too cold for this to recover, or it's too cold for XYZ, or we're at 9,000 feet right here. This will never get a chance. And I'm like, well, I mean, yes, those are contributing factors, but I don't think that's what we can blame a lot of the issues that we see up here on. It's not just the cold, it's, lack of moisture, the slowness of the biology, all these things. But I think it really tries to get passed off. Well, we're under snow for 6 months. Like, well, how much sun did we actually receive though in our growing period? And we're just not utilizing it properly.
It's a good question. It's a really good question. That's the business that we're in, but we don't really talk about. We're in the solar capture business. We're taking that solar energy and converting it into a form that is usable by humans.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And one thing too that I think is so interesting up here is how powerful our grasses are. We are 98% cool season, 98%. I don't know what percentage base my forage probably is that's perennial, but I would say it's huge. You don't see the weed problems like you really kind of see in the South. But I mean, when those cattle are going out there and getting a bite, it packs a massive punch compared to the quality of forage they could be getting somewhere else. And that's the other thing that I sit and kind of just look around and watch is like, wow, if we could, everybody talks about, all right, maybe I only grow 500 pounds of forage to the acre, which is a lot of my country. And I'm honestly kind of proud of it if it is growing 500. But all right, let's say we could get that up to 1,000. And everyone says, oh, well, you could only double your stock density. And I really wonder about that, because once you're just actually looking at the nutrient density available, at some point, yeah, an animal's going to plateau, they need so much dry matter intake, and yeah, you can create that whole argument. But I think these landscapes, if they could be shifted in their management, if we can get the Forest Service to change, if we can get the BLM to change, if we can get what limited sagebrush acres are actually privately held, if you could get that to change, I think it's a pretty fascinating thing. Well, think about like the cattle drives, the historical cattle drives, when they used to bring all those cattle all the way up here. It's not because there was ever a population up here. They were loading them on the railroad. Why were they doing that? And how much better was the forage base probably way back when they were doing that? And that's one thing I just sit and wonder all the time. So I'm like, how much wildlife population, which we have big game up here, and how many cattle were they actually grazing compared to where we're at now? And I don't think that we need to be growing 2,000 pounds to the acre up here, because that's what everybody says. Those mountains will never grow, XYZ. And I'm not here to say they will, but what they do grow is some pretty powerful stuff.
Interesting you bring that up. I've been thinking a lot lately about what the plains looked like, not just since we extirpated the buffalo, or since we trapped all the beaver out. So we can go all the way back to say 1500, when the Spanish let loose their horses and their Creole cattle that became the Corrientes and Longhorns, and they let loose their European diseases that, I mean, by some theory, and this is theory and opinion from what I've heard, between 95 and 98% of Native Americans were wiped out post 1500, post European contact. So by the time 1650s rolled around, and the history we were kind of taught starts, like the Mayflower and the Pilgrims, Plymouth Rock, that kind of stuff. Those early immigrants to this continent encountered a civilization that was maybe 100 years into recovery from a cataclysmic event that depopulated everybody they knew.
Yep.
and they had no writing. And if you lose that percentage of your population, how much of that oral history really survives?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So that can be debated still. We know that the Europeans came through in their search for beaver to make hats and killed all of the beaver, and we can kind of see some of the, we're seeing some of the effects of that now. We're seeing that beaver starting to go back in and move back into places where we've restored the habitat. So what I've been wondering about lately is they say that there were like 60 million bison, something like that.
Yep.
60 million bison. So were the bison overpopulated and headed for a resource crash because of lack of 200 years of hunting pressure by the Native Americans? That's something I've been kind of
Super
struggling
interesting.
with. So
Yeah.
maybe our perspective on the historical production of our rangelands and where we can graze in the mountains and the meadows, maybe it's a little bit skewed. Or I
Yeah.
guess
Too
I guess something
optimistic.
else that comes to mind now is my dad told me a long time ago, 90% of what we think we know might be 10% correct.
It's very true. I always ask myself that question in management. Like, is this an actual fact or is this a supposition? Because I should, alter my plans accordingly. But no, you bring up just a super interesting point. I've been wondering that a lot up here too, especially with the big game and how much we see these populations affected by human population. Should these animals actually be this high? Were these animals ever even up here? All of those questions. Does an elk actually want to graze at 13,000 feet? Probably not.
No, the elk want to be on the plains. Elk were plains animals.
Okay, so I wonder those kinds of questions all the time. And what's so interesting, again, going back to our Forest Service, going back to our game and fish, these management plans are written for this adapted. Okay, we have this much population up here, this much population up here. Oh, then we're going to feed them all in the feed grounds in the winter. We're going to extend your permit even higher up because you're getting more grizzly kill. So you need more acres. All the I don't know, the thought process of it all. And again, like going back to, I just don't think we even ultimately know potentially what we're managing for. We can look at, what do people always like to quote, the NRCS, what do they call those? The eco site descriptions, and then it has like the evolutionary step and progress, and then
Yeah,
climax
ecological site
vegetation.
description.
That's it. Yes. The climax vegetation of the ecological site description. Yes.
How do
But
they
when you
know?
actually look at those things, it's insane. It's like, okay, you're basically managing this to go back to maybe what it looked like 100 years ago. And that is 100% a manipulated environment. I mean, yeah. I mean, and not to say, oh, we should just not do anything. That's not what I'm suggesting. But I would say I think we're kind of doing the same thing, but maybe making ourselves feel better about it in some ways. Like, oh, I'm managing for this much percent canopy cover of sage and this much percent of blue bunch grass and this percent of, XYZ. And once I achieve those things, that's what this landscape was supposed to look like 100, 150 years ago. And ultimately, I mean, we might be managing under the same context of manipulation, but in a feel good manner, right?
Right.
Like, oh, this is what NRCS says is climax vegetation. Interesting.
But if we can get there without the use of fossil fuels and machinery, if we can get there only using our biological tools,
Mm-hmm.
I say that's a win. But as soon as we start pulling
Sure.
other tools out of
Yeah.
that toolbox, that's when your point total starts to go down rapidly.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, let's just be. I mean, the butterflies and rainbows feels good, but let's just be realistic. Is we're very consumptive organisms, and this planet is never going to look the same as before we entered it. But that's not to say, like, absolutely every step we can make towards perennial populations and ground cover, all these things. Absolutely. Sometimes I just wonder though if we're actually achieving what historically was truthfully present.
What is it our friend Dave Pratt likes to say? There's no use hitting bullseyes if you're aiming at the wrong target.
I haven't heard that one. That does sound like a Davism, but
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about Katie. Where are you from? And how did you get to Cora, Wyoming?
Yeah, I was raised in northwestern Oklahoma, up by a tiny town called Alene, but Woodward is kind of the closest population, if you will.
I
There's a
know where
Walmart.
Aline is. I know where
Do you
Woodward.
really?
Woodward's 2 hours away. I used to go down there to the sale barn.
Oh, yeah. That's okay. That's right. I forget that you're that close. Yeah, so I was raised out there. I was raised on a yearling outfit. We actually bought cattle out of Georgia growing up. That was our thing, Southeast cattle. So boy, did we grow up knowing how to, unfortunately, doctor and, all those things. But we made a shift in, trying to remember what year it was. I was in high school and my dad and we sold out of yearlings, and my dad and I actually partnered on a whole bunch of cows, went to college, started a beef business with my dad, did that from college. I went to college at A&M, Texas A&M, did animal science and rural entrepreneurship, ag economics, just the best program. The best educational pursuit I've actually ever had was the rural economics program there at Texas A&M, Dr. Reister. I'm still involved with that program. I still travel down there once or twice a year. It's just the greatest program. Anyways, and we sold beef for a while, and then I decided to get busy. So I kind of ran that for my dad for a while. And then once I got out of school, I went to TCU ranch management and did their master's program there, which I don't recommend doing. I was convinced that I was going to go, well, no, I would not recommend doing the master's level. There's like the regular certificate and then the master's. And I was convinced I needed all these credits that I was going to use. And it literally almost killed me, but
Next time I see, I'll have to ask what you really think about TCU's range management program.
No. There's some good and there's some need for change. But anyways, I
Moving
would
on.
not recommend doing the master's program in 1 year. Just don't do it in 1 year, or 9 months. Anyways, so out of there, I actually consulted for a little bit. And then I ended up on a ranch. This is how I'm dearest friends with Deborah Clark. I ended up being Emery and Deborah's neighbor in Henrietta, Texas. Managing a ranch there. We went from, I don't know, I guess I didn't have my fill of the beef, the run, the never-ending sprint of selling beef. And we went from weaning the first calves within my first 2 weeks there to selling beef at a wholesale level within 6 months. Built a facility. Man, did that for a while, a couple years, 2-3 years, and it just was not sustainable. When I left, they hired 5 people to do what I was doing. Okay, like that's how it was. It was a lot. It definitely was an excellent life lesson in how to appropriately manage my time and to create boundaries and learn to say no and not have to be in charge of everything. So,
I've learned that one a little late too.
Yeah, it's so hard. I still struggle. Yeah, and then I actually consulted for a while and traveled around, and I actually ended up just looking initially to consult up here. I met a gentleman in New Mexico while doing some consulting out there, and he told me about this ranch and what was going on. And Jason's a great, he's a very ethical landowner. He manages his investments, but he has a strong land ethic. And that was something that was really attractive to me because it was somebody who actually had a strong land ethic but wanted to make money, not just do something that makes you feel good and don't worry about the cost. So anyways, I ended up coming up here a couple of times, and Jason and I visited quite a bit and ended up interviewing, and I actually ended up here from that. We've been here almost 3 years now. It's our third full season. And it has been just the most enormous learning experience for these landscapes, and getting to be involved in industry and trade in so many other parts of the US. And um, it's definitely allowed me to develop the ability, I mean, to trade, to identify those undervalued areas. And Cora is so unique because it just helps you create so much value. That's the one thing Cora really has going, other than super strong grass. It's creates value. Otherwise, everything else pretty much works against you here. But
You could go anywhere in the country and ranch.
I hate this question. So that is such, yeah. I need to be careful what I say. I think cattle can be managed wonderfully in the West and in the mountains. I do think that there's a lot of agencies and a lot of people that vastly need to improve on that. Um, that being said, these landscapes are really hard. They're just really hard. You know, they have all the rules going against you: gravity, distance, precip. You know, all the rules of thumb for ranching are pretty much thumbs down when you get up into the West and the Rocky Mountains, especially. Um, that being said, it is a lot of fun. But my answer is ultimately be Kansas, Oklahoma, northern Texas. It's just, it makes so much sense for so many reasons, but you know, production capacity wise, ecologically, all those things, cost of production. And two, it's such an interesting thing to me because you have so much opportunity available all around you to the east and the west for the right trade. You're sitting in the T of the value corridor, you know, and you have access to both sides, which is so fascinating because there's rarely a place, like typically you get far enough west where you're boxed to the west, or you're far enough to the east that you're boxed east because you're dipping back into those central cattle. But that is such an interesting area to me because you kind of have two different places where you can make it work. Say the west is in a drought versus the east is wet versus this versus that. The timing's never the same and when that value is available either. So Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, but it sure is fun up here though.
I was so what I'm thinking about right now is I remember the wisdom from probably 15, 20 years ago that said, if you want to ranch west of 100th meridian, it's going to be hard.
Yeah.
And I think that line keeps moving to the east.
Yes.
And somebody told me, I think it was my dad told me, he was talking to Wally Olson the other day. You know Wally, don't you?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And Uncle Wally said that he thought that he wasn't going to do a whole lot of business west of Interstate 35 anymore. This is just too inconsistent and too dry west of 35. And I'm like, well,
Mm-hmm.
crap, that's 100 miles east of me.
Yeah.
But the point about Oklahoma, Kansas, Texas is well taken. And I think it was my friend Hobbs that said this, like, because he just moved from Oregon last fall, little under a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
He got rid of he's got rid of the place in Oregon and he moved to Lufkin, Texas.
Oh.
He can graze year round. There's population close by. It's in the middle of the country. The summer's not terrible. I mean, it kind of makes sense, you know, like.
Yeah. How's he doing socially in Lufkin?
Probably about like he was doing in Oregon.
Okay. Okay.
I don't know. I'll have to maybe I'll have to get him back on the show and talk about how much of an outcast. Talk about his experiences at the Lufkin coffee shop and feed store.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he's he's one of those Corriente people like me. He likes his horn cattle. And of course, when he does that and he's moving them 4 times a day, you can only imagine what the neighbors think.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's
so
interesting.
I know Hobbs well enough. He probably doesn't give much of a crap about what they say about him at the coffee shop.
There you go.
He probably drives by with his French press and laughs at him anyway.
It's a good policy. It's a good policy.
So trading, you keep talking about trading. So tell me, what do you mean by trading?
Mm-hmm. So basically, I mean, how I create value and what I spend my time doing is basically figuring out how many undervalued animals can I purchase, hold for a long enough time in Cora, most of the time. Let's use Cora to keep it simple. In Cora, that I can get closer to that fall board, get stronger and stronger basis. Basically, okay, looking at my snow tell, how much snowpack I have, how much, because that's going to determine everything. How many can I buy? How many are available where that I can warehouse? I don't care what they do. I mean, I do not care if they put on a half pound. I don't care. I'd honestly probably rather them do that, have lighter cattle to bring in that are going to do better, but I can stock more of them. And then, which I do end up buying heavy cattle a lot of the time, but they're really green. And bring them here and okay, how long can I hold them to get them towards that fall value to lower my basis risk, and how many can I optimize doing that with? And basically it's that ridiculous saying that always confuses everybody, like you make the money when you buy them, you know.
Yeah.
It's 100% true. That's all I do. And it's been quite a network of people to develop, and I try to make sure nobody has a crossover territory. But I have a Southwest Idaho guy, I have a Western Utah guy, I have 2 California guys, I've got an Oregon guy, I've got a Northern Arizona guy.
And these are order buyers, right?
Yep. And it's pretty, it's interesting because I don't get to check my cattle super regular, but my crew on the ground, I require a video off the truck. Everybody's tagged to a source that's specific to a location and specific to the buyer. And then everybody has to be on an inside pasture system and basically monitored for X period of time. And then all the doctoring, because there's so many calves, I don't care about if it's number 2318, you know, whatever. I just want the guy's name that written down that bought him and where he came from. And then everybody gets scored. What percentage of the sickness did you have? What percentage of death loss did you have? And then at the end, the cut pile, what percentage of the cuts did you buy? And that's kind of how I manage all of them. If there is anything off the truck that's just like, oh my gosh, this is ridiculous, why would you try to slip this in on me? I'll just send them back. I'll call the guys on the ground. I'm like, cut him out. Even if it's one, put him back. I'm not doing this.
Order buyers hate it when you send anything back on the truck.
So angry. They never will do it again, you know. And don't get me wrong, like I get if there's 20 coming through the ring and there's one stinker, it's like, okay. But if this is a repetitive issue, yeah. I mean, that's what kills us, is how many cuts we ultimately end up with. It's 3 hours, 3.5 hours to the sale barn up here, which blows my mind. To the closest sale barn.
3.5 hours.
Isn't that nuts? You got to go over the mountains. So you're like just burning the fuel. You don't go with the gooseneck. I hire a semi to take all my cuts, 2 or 3 trips.
I was just sitting here trying to think of how many big auctions I could hit in 3 hours.
Yes.
I mean,
yes. It is so amazing how, like, you want to talk about issues in the West, but how limited the resources are that's available. Like a sale barn, you can't get cake. You might not even be able to get fence posts. You can't get a cake feeder. I couldn't find a no-till drill in the western half of Wyoming or the eastern side of Idaho. I mean, it's just like resources that we're so used to, I think, down south and are so commonly available. That's just, it's not how it works up here.
You mean there's not a Tractor Supply in Cora that you could just run down to and buy a pallet of post and wire?
So there's a Ridley's, but basically how it works is when the truck comes across I-80, the entire, or not a Ridley's, it's what do they call it here? Bomgars. Bomgars is the Tractor Supply of the North. If you ever see one, just stop on in. But so they only want to send so many trucks because populations are so small. Basically, it's like, well, if they have room by the time the truck gets to the end of the interstate and there's some still on there, we'll get you some. But it might be this month or next month. And it's like, lady, I need this yesterday. That doesn't happen. No. A mechanic, to get a mechanic to work on the tractors, the neighbors, we will pool our money together and basically create a list of stops, because it takes so far to get the John Deere or Cat guy or Kubota, whoever, to get them out, that like 4 or 5 of us will have a little call chain, and I'll keep a sticky note of who has how much work before we can get a mechanic to come out.
Wow.
I'm telling you, it's like 100 years ago up here. It's slow. Just resources are not available.
Do you think that learning how to live with less is going to insulate you from future risk of more supply chain disruptions?
Oh, for sure. After living up here, have gotten really confident in how little a yearling actually needs, and how much more you can actually do with your animal husbandry and really your grazing. I've gotten really into like Fred's stuff, Fred Provenza, all of his work, and these big bunch of yearlings. Knock on wood, I have never lost more than 1% to actual death, loss, or sickness.
Yeah, let me find some wood. I need to do some knocking on that
Isn't
one
that
too.
crazy? But again, it
Anytime,
shows you, I think, the power of the forage base up here.
anytime I've lost more than 1%, it's like been attributable to like a cold snap or a weather event, or some other event. It's not a nutritional thing or a disease thing that's ever happened to me.
Yeah, I feel like trading yearlings, you can really run into it. Like, so my first year, I had a whole bunch of Hawaiians. You want to talk about a wild experience? We ran a whole bunch of Hawaiian cattle, and they were so sick when they showed up. I thought, this is going to be.
How long does it take to ship them from the islands to the mainland?
So that's what's interesting. They used to come on a ship, and that was like, they put them on, steamed them back across as fast as possible. And I can't remember what the total timetable was, but it was not good. Like, it was several days kind of thing. And then now they do them on C-130s. It's crazy. They have, yes, they have these crates. They're giant. They look like a shipping container, but they have all these holes perforated in them. Load them all up, load them in there, and they show up within like 4 or 5 hours and are dumped out on the coast. But by the time that the Hawaiians actually get them rounded up, they get them down to the airport, like all of that.
It's probably a couple of days.
It's like a 24, 36 hour deal. The ones that live, you can't kill them, but
I imagine that airplane ride is a little stressful.
Yeah, the shrink on them is crazy. Well, and so this is super interesting. When you buy cattle in Hawaii, there's no shrink put into the cattle, and there's no slide. So when you go out and bid cattle in Hawaii, you just look at the whole year-round bulls in their calf crop, and they're breeding 12 months out of the year because they're on green grass year round. You look at the whole calf crop and offer a price per pound on the whole. Yeah. And then there's some cuts are allowed, but basically if you start to cutting on them too deep, like I know a lot of guys that they weren't ever allowed to come back. Like, you pretty much have to take the whole thing. So no slide, no shrink. There's no sort of check weight. You literally just, they drive you through their cattle and then you just make a bid.
Okay, cow trader Katie, we got to pause for a second. Okay, shrink I get, which is the amount of weight that they're going to lose in shipping, which is, a pretty consistent thing. Explain slide to me in words that a 5th grader can understand.
Slide. So let's say I put my cattle into you. I said they're going to weigh 700 pounds, Brian, and they come in and they weigh 720 pounds, shrunk. Put a 3% on them on the ground. They weighed 720. So we have 20 pounds, 0.2 of 100 weight that they're going to be over. Okay. Typically what I see, it makes me crazy, but you can't get a fair slide anymore. You usually see a halfway up, halfway down. So you'll see like an 8-4. So for every however many pounds they're over, you're going to slide 8 cents backwards. For however many pounds they're under, you're going to slide 4 cents the other way. So you really get discounted. You don't create more value necessarily having a lighter animal. You do, but only half as much value. They're not going to give it all to you. So if you had 20 pounds that were over, times your 8 cents, we sold them to you at $1.50, it'd be $1.50 minus that, what, 0.16, and we'd adjust our price there. So 720 times 1.4, whatever that would be, 48, whatever it is. Does that make sense?
I think so. I'll listen again when I'm editing and actually write down the math. But yeah, I think that makes sense.
Yeah. So your 0.2 times your 8 cents, and then $1.50 minus that adjustment would be the price you get per pound.
So it'd be like what, 1.1 cents per pound discount?
But yeah, 1.6 basically per pound discount. And
Okay.
then you put that back on 100 weight. So it'd be $1.50 minus that 1.6, you'd be at 148.4 per 100. Versus if it had gone the other way in your favor, rather than obtaining that full value, you'd only get half as much.
Yeah, I get that. And I've looked at Superior and I see that slide symbol, and sometimes it's balanced and sometimes it's unbalanced. So now I understand
yeah.
a little
So
bit.
typically if it's unbalanced, you're going to have a pretty serious weight stop on there, or I've seen buyers really balk at cattle. I normally offer it, if I offer the 8.4, I really like to do no weight stop, but man, the order buyers are just getting to where they want a 30-pound both ways, or they just don't like to touch them, and they still want the 8.4. It's like this year, I'm afraid that's how I'm going to have to let mine go.
Well, order buyers got to eat too.
I mean, I get it. Except for they're probably buying for JBS.
And if you want to do the sell buy, either you're going to be spending 6 days a week in the barn yourself, or you got to have guys that you can trust to do it. And that's kind of the problem I've always seen with it.
Yes.
Like there's all kinds of opportunities in the beef and cattle business to generate extra value. But the trouble is I can't clone myself, and it takes, I have to be, to a large extent, I got to be the guy doing that. Big problem I've always seen with the sell buy is, how do you trust an order buyer? How do you find the right order buyers, and how do you trust the order buyers? That sounds like you came up with a great system to, I don't know, grade them or performance.
So I grade them, and they don't want to be, it's kind of a pride thing, they don't want to have something turned back on them. Two, another really great thing is, if you're not sure about someone, you don't want to do it with like some, which is very hypocritical of me, but like some really young guy that all he wants to do is drive around in his truck and hit a barn every day and see some buddies along. You don't want that. You want, in my experience, you want the old guy who's been doing it since the dawn of time. The guy can't even tell you what's in the sale catalog that day because he can't text you the picture. You got to call the sale barn secretary. Like, that's who you want. And odds are that guy probably has some money if he knows what he's doing. And I found the best way to make sure everybody's interests are mutually aligned. Hey, let's 50-50 on 250 head this first year. Let's do 500. Let's 50-50 them. Okay. And most of the guys would be like, well, why do I want to do that? I just want to buy them for you. Well, I'll still pay you to buy them full price. I'll still pay you, $100, and I will finance the cattle, but I want 7.5% back on my finance of the cattle purchase. And then you're going to pay all the direct costs, and we'll see how we settle up in the end. That will tell you real quick what kind of, is if they're just immediately like, oh, no, I don't want you to buy from me.
Because they're going to try to cheat you at some point.
Yes. Yeah. Somewhere. Yeah.
Yep.
That's a really good one I've found. And if they've been trading cattle long enough, they don't have enough money to trade 200 steers, 250 steers, you got a problem. That's probably shouldn't do anything with them.
You need a Central Texas buyer? I know a guy.
Oh man.
You might like him. I mean, he's an older guy. He just, hits 1 or 2 a week and does some video trades.
There we go.
We'll talk later.
There we go.
So how did you figure out the whole sell by marketing?
Man, I just kind of had to do it. So when I took this job, Jason, the gentleman, Jason Spaeth, who owns this ranch, who hired me, he's a great guy, but he he's very involved in the sense of he wants to understand ecological return, but from a business perspective, he's really great in offering a lot of autonomy. And off the bat, it was pretty much like, buy X thousands of steers and make me this amount of my money. And that was it.
And you were like, I
Okay.
guess I better figure out how to do that.
So yeah, so I got really, really into, well, number one, we have a cattle facts guy who, good old Patrick Linnell. I think that guy like quakes in his boots when I call, because he's like, this girl. He's probably so tired of me. So I have all these crazy ideas. I'm like, Patrick, listen to what I thought up last night. We'll talk it through. But basically, it's just incessantly being in the market in any form possible. Cattle facts, watching. That's when I couldn't figure out how to get the camera on when you're on, because I was sitting in my office working, but I'm watching the superior yearlings that sell today. You know, it's just constantly being in the know, watching the cash trade, watching the board. I have it on my phone. I'm always refreshing. What's the move? And then I think the second part of that I've learned too is being disciplined. Like, I calculate my thresholds, I figure them, and then I go to bed. Like, there's no motion to this. And I don't give my guys, I think where people get in a lot of problems is like, oh, but if you're close, this is the price I want you to spend. But if you're close and they look really good and they look like they have a lot of value, I trust your judgment if you need another dollar or two. Yeah. Like, if you spend one more dollar, you're paying for it. So don't spend it, you know? And I think that that's the big thing that I was able to learn, and like sticking to the discipline, like just the fundamentals, pays out astronomically. Especially at first, I was so scared. I was like, I'm not going to get this place stocked. It was a super high market when I was trying to buy back my first time. And so that was what really made me start looking. I was like, I have to find something to average this out. So even if I need to buy some cattle to make my head days right on my price on my lease, then okay, I got to find X number undervalued and be dang sure that I can get them, and then have the right blend. Right? Do I have so many of these that I can blend with these, and shaping those cattle right? Because every single buyer you have and every single rep you have will want to just pick them apart. And before people come look at my cattle, I'll always tell them, like, these are the rules. You cannot sort like this. You cannot take these out. There's X number I know of these. You know, like, I think I have a truckload of Herefords. You cannot touch them. If there's a Hereford in the cut pile, unless he has a bad eye, he's getting on the truck. Like, that's how we're creating value. So I think it's, you know, balancing your quality and using discipline, even when it's just like, ooh, you just have to have nerves of steel. Sometimes you just let them go all day long at a half cent past where you want to be, but it'll pay off. And I think that's what I really had to learn more than anything.
So you haven't, like, did you read Bud Williams, or have you been to Wally's sell by school or any of that stuff? No.
So one of my best friends went to Wally's school, and I like, give me all your notes, because I've never had time to go, which is ridiculous. I need to go. You know who I really want to go to? There's a guy in Nebraska now. Do you know him? Let me look him up. He does a trade school up there now, and I've just heard phenomenal things. I've talked to him over the phone a few times, and I really want to go see him do his school.
Well, now I'm waiting for this name. I even have my pen ready so I can write down another.
Really? Oh no.
Guest suggestion list.
I'm looking. Yeah, he's a new Doug Ferguson.
Okay.
Yeah, and I have just heard the greatest things about him. Not that, I mean, Wally's school is great. But MrCattleMaster.com cracks me up. But yeah, I really want to go to his school. And it's pretty intense. It's I think it's 3.5 days, which is kind of long for one of those deals. But he's apparently just really great. So I would like to go to his school.
Well, now that it's actually been said out loud, at least 2 other people have written in and said, hey, you should have Doug Ferguson on one of these.
Oh, really?
So yeah, I guess we'll have to do that.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I'm friends with the right Doug Ferguson on Facebook because I do see him posting stuff
Okay.
about cows and marketing
Uh-huh.
every once in a while. So
He's in Nebraska. He lives in Nebraska. So if he's in Nebraska, it's probably the right Doug.
he might even listen. So Doug, if you're out there listening, drop me an email if I haven't already sent you one, and let's get together and do an episode.
Yeah, and I'm the annoying girl that never registered for next week because I'm selling cattle instead. After I emailed him twice. So that was good. In the winter. In the winter.
Yeah. Well, maybe if we get a day off, we'll go take care of that.
Yeah.
So tell me about dogs. Do you use a lot of dogs?
Yeah, we do. We honest to goodness would never get out of our forest permits if we didn't have dogs. I use my little girl here. I use collies myself. A lot of people don't like them because they say they don't bite enough, but in this country, you don't need a dog that bites. You need a dog that has really good feel. If that makes sense. And I'm used to, again, down south. I know I keep saying that, but it seems like the trend down there, I have seen dogs that have a whole lot of bite, which I get that you have brush and
I think training dogs with more bite is the wrong direction, but I also don't use a dog every day.
yeah, I mean, there's applications for it. Don't get me wrong. But our big thing here is, I mean, we can go out with our dogs and three of us could move easily, probably 700, close to 1,000 steers between dogs and three people horseback. So again, it saves so many miles on horses, it saves so many miles on people. And then a lot of our stuff in the forest, we run in a lot of aspen, sagebrush, complex type broken up mottes of them, if you will. And again, you might be gathering a 5,000 acre pasture and you can't go trot over to every aspen mott and look around in there. So the dogs really, really help with that. Training them. If I say go out and search, I mean, my dog will be gone. I mean, she hunts for them until she finds them, comes back. And that's the big thing. And too, I used to be super against dogs in the cells down on the meadows doing the high density. And I strongly disagree with that now. I've gotten this dog to where I can get her out in front of them. So I'm moving them by myself. There's that, the argument of move your cattle, don't drag them, or however it is people say that, but like don't trade them necessarily to the whistle or to the buggy because they just get sour and they just run past you and they don't keep eating. They just are running around, especially yearlings. You don't get a hold of them. You just open the gate and let mayhem commence. And that's one thing that I found with this dog is if I can get her around front of them and just bend the front of them, like just there, bring them back around into me, those cattle will be grazing before I leave, which is not necessarily a problem that we've had in the past. It's just like it always seems that there's more walking for a while before they really think about eating. But she's gotten it to where I can still be in that gate. She'll run out in front of 2,000 head and bend the front end of them, and they're turned back eating before I've got the wire gate closed.
Just shift their attention from that run mode back to different direction and maybe look for a bite to eat.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think the application that I always saw that was wrong is when in cells, for me, just for us and how we do it, if the dog's behind them cell to cell, not a good thing for the bulk of the herd. Now, if you've got to clean up, tell her to bring them to the gate because you don't want to be driving your four-wheeler everywhere, great. But it seems to me if you're moving the herd with a dog behind them when they already want to move anyways, probably a little too much energy.
Yep, I would agree with that. Wait, I was thinking about like how to talk about how we move because just had to do one the other day that I'm thinking of. They were already kind of on the side. We were moving from a 75 acre paddock to a 40 acre paddock. Okay, not a big deal. Had a 20-foot gate and barbed wire to go through, not even hot wire to beat. And I don't know why this happens, but like it always seems to be when I have a scheduled move that's been on the grazing chart and I go out that morning to do it, they're
Yeah.
standing by the correct gate.
Oh, that's not where I
That's
thought this was going, Brian.
that's happened the last 3 or 4 times. Where'd you think it was going?
I thought it was going quite the opposite way,
Oh,
but
that they would all leave and go somewhere
yeah.
else and go off plan.
Yeah.
Oh, that happens too, but not lately.
Yeah.
So it was just last year when they were trying to graze the long pasture. But no, they were kind of all there by the gate. So I like to come to the herd from the pasture that they're going into.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So I go into the pasture they're coming into, and I come, and so they see me coming from there.
Mm-hmm.
I go open the gate, and depending on where the cattle are, maybe I'll go in and I'll call them. I got a good set of lungs. Call them.
Yeah, just
Yell,
holler
come
at
on.
him.
Just yell, come on, cows, and they all start to come slowly. And what I've been training my intern to do is to go with the initial group or lead the initial group through the gate. But then after you go through the gate, to come in and turn around and set. And and depending on where you set in relation to the gauge or the fence or whatever, those cattle will come in and they'll bend.
Mm-hmm.
And
like back up I see what you're saying.
or not back up, or just your presence there. Like if you're a little farther off in the distance, kind of centered up on the gate, they'll kind of come up to us. And as they get closer, they'll start to settle in and go back to grazing.
Yeah.
And maybe it's because I've had and the herd that was on it, they've been here since October.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we've probably got 40, 50, 60 odd moves on them since October.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they just settle in. They don't run to the gate. They don't run through the gate.
That's nice.
And I think that maybe some of what you're seeing is behavior in yearlings. Like I said, I'm dealing with cows.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm dealing with all older cows, and these animals remember everything that's ever been done to them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They remember everybody that's yelled at them, everybody that's thrown a rope at them, everybody that's stuck them with a hot shot.
Yeah.
I think they have a very strong memory for that kind of thing. And the better we are with our stockmanship and our husbandry about things like that, about where the dog is, where you are, and the energy you put into the herd just to get them through the gate, the more we pay attention to these things, the faster that they settle when we move them, and the lower their stress level is. Because when you're conscious of the energy you're putting in the herd, you're more conscious of their energy. And it becomes a lot easier to notice, like, oh, I did that. Didn't affect the ones right next to me, but it did scare some over in the middle, and that caused a change in their behavior.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. Hey, I wanted to ask you about, I saw your video one time. Are you still a bat latch guy?
I still have them. I haven't been using them, but yeah.
What was your experience, you feel like, with animal performance or animal behavior using them?
It took about 2 weeks.
Oh, wow.
10 days to 2 weeks before all of them really got on the program. And I've got experience training 2 different groups. So I've only trained 2 different groups to bat latches. And we started, I think we were doing like 10 o'clock moves. We were just having the bat latch open at 10. And then I read something that said, oh, maybe your bricks is a little bit higher, closer to solar noon or a little after. So I was like, oh, that sounds like about 2 o'clock. So we'll just aim for something in the early afternoon that should be really close to peak photosynthesis. And I just kind of settled on 2 o'clock. It took them a while to get used to it in the mornings, but we'd already been moving them in the mornings. So it was a small change for them, but instead of, rolling up a piece of polywire, they had to go through a fairly narrow gate. That's the biggest drawback to how I was using the bat latches.
Yeah, the springs aren't very long.
But there's other ways to skin the cat, right?
So you can extend them.
No, I've seen guys use those to raise the fence up, use the spring and the bat latch. Like you put the spring up on a pole and you have it come down to the fence, and the bat latch is holding it down.
Yeah.
And then when the bat latch goes off, it pulls the fence up high enough that the cattle can walk underneath of it.
Nice.
I've
That's
seen
interesting.
that done. I've seen them set to close a gate on the spring, like close a 10-foot gate using the
Oh,
spring. It
yeah.
released the spring and it went and closed the gate. So there's they've got a lot of different uses. So back to what I was saying, it took 7, 10, maybe 2 weeks is about the longest it'll take them to get used to that bat latch. And with anything else, when you're transitioning to something that's totally unfamiliar to the cattle, they're not going to know what to do with it the first couple times they see it. You're just going to have to show them. And for us, it was walking out. It was just being there when the latch opened and walking back and forth through the gate a couple times. Something I think helped with that was on that spring gate, we put a bunch of flagging tape. We put yellow and blue flagging tape on that
Mhm.
spring gate. So that was another extra visual indicator that the fence wasn't there for the cattle. And I have several videos of it, as we kind of got down to the, midsummer, the first year we were using them and we were moving at 2 o'clock, it kind of got to be a game. Like
Right.
it kind
Right.
of got to be a game to see if I could get out there and get in a position where they weren't paying attention to me and watch the gate open and watch them all move. And I tell you, like once they got used to it, once they understood what was going on with the bat latches and the polywire, it was really cool to see that gate open. And within 2 minutes, 100 head of cattle were in a different paddock,
Yeah,
heads
that's awesome.
down, grazing. That was,
That's awesome.
it was cool. So
Very cool.
did that answer your question about bat
Yeah,
latches?
yeah. Well, and you kind of gave some tips on training to them and um, thoughts how to use them different because that was one of my big concerns was the gate's not big enough, and two yearlings they're just so you never know who out of the 2,000 or 3,002 is going to be standing there that can hear that thing. So that's I think that the training curve or timeline. But the other good thing about yearlings is they're probably walking around.
Yeah.
So they're gonna find it. That's I've used one a couple times and they eventually moved themselves, but we had some ding dongs that couldn't figure out how to get out once the main herd was on the other side. They decided to tear down a polywire and we were creating bad habits for a period of time. So it was like, okay, we're done with the batch latch thing for right now. So we haven't tried it again yet, but we need to.
I've got one herd approaching. One herd is heading towards the west end of my south side. That's all set up for strip grazing. We'll be there in just a few more days. And hopefully we'll be able to put post in the dirt.
Oh my
Because that
God.
might uh another week of 100 degrees without any moisture. I don't like I want to strip graze. Like
Yeah.
I want to do some strip grazing this year while I've got some labor around for another month.
Yeah.
I don't know if we're going to be able to put, I don't know if we're going to be able to put step-ins in the dirt.
Yeah.
I mean, it it gets it gets down to, it just gets so dry. You have to really hunt like for the
Yeah.
right
Oh yeah.
clump of grass or the right plant crown, or put it down
Yep.
like, you know, hack off a freaking yucca plant and put it right down by the yucca plant where the root was.
That's awesome.
You know, I'm just afraid it'll get to where, we're spending 2-3 hours to build
Yeah,
800
it's
feet of
not worth it.
polywire, and it's
Yeah.
just not
Yeah.
not making it work. So
Yeah.
we're gonna
Yeah.
we're gonna investigate it. We're gonna look at that and hopefully be able to make it work. Hopefully we'll get some rain. Hopefully we'll have a little bit of rain and it won't be a
Great.
struggle to put post in the dirt.
Would be great.
So tell me about some of these other joint monitoring programs that you kind of mentioned earlier with BLM and Forest Service.
Mhm. Yeah. So basically, what we've been able to do is bring everybody together and say, "Hey, it's not that the way we're managing these landscapes is not working. It's that we could be doing so much better." And I think that was mutually agreed upon. Most of these Forest Service permits are severely understocked and then have areas of severe abuse from loafing, and water and all those issues, topography and all that. So we were actually able to get together and make the clear outcome objective of combining 3 forest permits into one herd, which would be huge, like just monumental if we were able to change that. And what
That's
was
not like,
interesting,
that's not a Forest Service and a BLM. That's just three different Forest Service.
yeah, 3 different Forest Service, which they all have different dates. They all have different stock numbers and densities and all these things. But it was, hey, we know that the cumulative value is this. Why can't we combine and then manage within those permits to also meet some of those parameters? Because from the south end to the far north end, the elevation's probably close to 3,000 feet and change. So obviously we need to start in the south end and work our way north. And, we acknowledge all those things and mutually agreed. So we agreed on parameters the Forest Service would accept. I found to be beneficial and actually create value for the ranch. And the Conservation District found was easy enough to actually complete it, because a lot of these places we're having to pack in horseback. It's not like you can take a mule and take your 5 measuring tapes and, whatever, all your 5 computers and yada yada.
You're
And
packing
then Game
everything
and
on a
Fish.
horse.
Yeah, yeah. And then Game and Fish was able to agree, okay, this isn't affecting wildlife or is positively affecting wildlife. So basically what we're doing is creating a baseline of, we're set stock the same way we've always been this year. And we move our cattle a lot within the permits, like probably more than the Forest Service wants us to. But also last year was told we had the best Forest Service permits in Sublette County after only 3 years of being here. So I was like, you know what? We're on to something here, folks. So that's the goal. And what we're going to start doing is combine the 2 northernmost permits together, which everybody would tell you is the most fragile, but they have way higher precip compared to the southern end. They're just at a higher elevation, and then combine the third, and it'll be 5 years worth of monitoring. So year 1, set stock, same situation, baseline monitoring. Year 2, initial combination of 2 northernmost permits. Year 3, second year of monitoring on those 2 northernmost permits. Make a conclusion or defer to year 4. So, okay, we don't see any negative change. That's their expectation. That's what's really frustrating too. Not that we see any positive change, but okay, you're not destroying things out here. So if you want to do this, I guess we'll let you do it. Then 4th year, they can defer and or allow us to bring in the 3rd permit. But the ultimate design of the project is to combine them all. And what's really interesting, I don't know if you're familiar with the Green Drift or the Upper Green. It's the largest cattle drive still intact in the United States. So it occurs, it's crazy. It occurs right out our gate. They drive cattle 80 plus miles from the desert to the high country for the winter, or excuse me, gosh, for the summer. They go winter on the desert. And they basically come off of a massive BLM permit that is set stocked the same month every year. Go up, they do run 4 units up in the Forest Service, and they do a really great job monitoring the cattle. They have camp men living in teepees up there with them all the time. There's 13,000 head of animals that come up this thing. Massive. It's massive. It runs basically, you should get on a map after this call and look where Cora, Wyoming is, and look where Du Bois is. All of that acreage. All of it. And then they run them basically in 4 different units. And then each of those units has a pasture rotation system. But what's really interesting, and one thing we've been talking about, is how can this pilot project help to manage those cattle better, to where they basically just have, like, some places only have a 2 pasture unit rotation, and they're in there every year. They just switch which pasture they go into first. They
That's
split
not
up
a rotation. That's an oscillation.
No, it's not a rotation. That's right. It's an oscillation. And the other massive issue that they have is predation. They plan to lose 15 to 20% to bear kill a year. Yes. Okay. The riders can't hardly keep up with the cows, to keep up with the bears, to keep up with, all this. It's mostly pairs. They're picking off calves. But one of the huge things was, okay, what if we actually could prove you can improve your landscape, you can increase your stock numbers, and oh, hey, by the way, there's one herd, where they're at, if the grizzlies killed them, and they're probably not going to come in there with that many bunched cattle together. It's usually a pair that's off and alone. They can get compensated, but a forest rider has to identify the kill, and then it's crazy. I've never learned so much about how to identify how something was killed and by what. It's like crime scene investigation, but animals, and they come up, it's called a wildlife investigator. They investigate, deem the cause of death, and then you can get compensated. But hey, guess what? The federal government is just funneling a whole bunch of money into paying people because of a mismanaged situation so that they'll keep grazing up there. It's crazy.
Oh, the
So,
government paying people for mismanagement?
yeah, I know.
What?
Can you imagine that? When have they ever done that? So, anyways, the hope is that this project can actually create some real policy change for the county and accelerate the timeline. So basically, if this project doesn't help or something else doesn't go through in the meantime, we're not going to see any shift at all in management strategy for another 15 years minimum. It's crazy. It's crazy. And how many acres, how much water resource, I mean, not to get on the water resource, issue in the West and with the Colorado River Pact, but I mean, it's about to be crazy enough. They're not going to have stock water allowances even out of a river.
That whole Colorado River Compact situation, I don't know if it's a can of worms, if it's a powder keg that's about ready to explode.
It's a powder keg. I strongly feel.
I mean, it's
basically so the issue is, number one, everybody's let the water get so far down because we're watering golf courses and we're have Vegas in the desert and all this insanity. And by the way, why the heck are we storing water in a reservoir in a desert? We talk about evaporation, all these issues that we have present. Okay. And it's gotten to the point. So basically, I can't remember the actual year of formation, so I don't want to say the wrong year, but 19 something, whenever the Colorado River Pact came in, early 1900s, you have a water right past that 1900 and whatever, no water for you in agriculture, zero water. I'm not saying flood irrigation is a great thing. I am, however, saying that flood irrigation holds a heck of a lot of water in the soil, and 70% of that water is an in-stream return flow.
Yep.
The reality, though, is a lot of those water rights that are past 1900 and whatever make up a vast majority or quite a bit of production that you're going to see in the West. I think it's going to have some impact on some food supply. The second thing is, too, people are actually going to be metered to their ditch levels. Unless you are near a population center, nobody is metered to a ditch level. Okay. And when so-and-so's grandpa put that in with the mule team 100 years ago, and he said, oh, I think it's pulling about X amount of CFS out of this source on these dates, he had no clue. Okay. And that ditch, there's probably no subtable anywhere near what it was 100 years ago. Okay, so you probably need 3 times the legal limit of water. So this is what's really interesting. Even if a water right stays attached to a landscape, many, many, many water rights in the West are going to become dysfunctional. You won't actually be able to use the water in proper place
because the water's just not there.
It's not there. It's just not there. And I'm not saying that it's the most ethical use. It 100% could be improved. But what's absolutely insane is you're going to drain the sponge. You're going to take it downstream. You're going to put it in a lake in a desert. You're going to give the people of Vegas power and the people of Tucson a golf course. What return is there on that?
Well, it certainly contributes to the economy of Tucson with that golf course and, all the people that we can live there and, all the fruit trees that we irrigate in the desert Southwest.
How are you going to have a drink of water? I mean, the rancher can cry victim all day long. Oh, I won't be able to have hay. Oh, I won't be able to this. Adapt your management, whatever. My argument is, if you don't put the water in the ground and store it, you're only going to lose more and more and more. And guess what? Eventually, there's not going to be any more water to come downstream.
So earlier I brought up that, the extirpation of the beaver for European hats. And I understand that. I feel like I have a good understanding of that in the context of the plain states, like from the Front Range east to the Mississippi. Okay. I'm not going to say I'm an expert from Texas to North Dakota either. Like,
sure,
I've got a pretty narrow circle that I feel like I know a little bit about. But what I wonder is, what the Colorado River look like in, say, 1650 or 1500 or
Oh
even
yeah.
1800 before they started messing with it.
Oh yeah.
And
How much more water, not only the river itself, but the surrounding acreage, again, the sponge.
yeah, and
How much
that's
water did you let go?
kind of what I'm getting at with the beavers.
Yes.
Because they come in, it might only look like there's an extra foot of water there.
They
But what they've
create the
really
sponge.
done is they've moved that water table up
Yep.
several feet
Yep.
up the whole frickin' valley.
Yep. They create the sponge.
Well, yeah. They store the surface water, they trap the erosion. And there's only one,
Yep.
if you've got sediment suspended in water, there's only one way to get it out. You got to slow
Yep.
the water down. How do you do that?
Yep.
With a dam.
Yep.
Anyway,
And now what we're going to do is leave it all in to rip through there again to go to a storage in the middle of a desert. And we're not going to spread any of it. It's crazy.
the thing that blows my mind about dams is, yeah, they're sediment traps. So we built all these dams on the rivers in the West. I mean, even in the Midwest, everywhere. We built dams everywhere, and we're tapping them
Mm-hmm.
for hydropower and
Yeah.
recreation and drinking water.
Yeah.
What happens when they fill up with dirt?
Yeah. Oh, that's yes. What happens when they fill up with dirt or there's just even no water there?
There's
That's what's just
oh, we'll get right back to the Colorado River. There's a reservoir in Kansas. It's up close to Manhattan, Kansas, home of Kansas State University.
mhm.
It's called Tuttle Creek Reservoir. It was built back in the 60s.
I think I've been there. I think I know exactly what you're talking about.
Well, upstream of Tuttle Creek, there's a lot of commodity farming, and they haven't changed any of their soil management or pesticide or herbicide management practices. And I saw a study, I think it's probably 2 years old now, that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers spends about 10 times the amount of money per year that it originally cost to build the dam 60 years ago.
Dredge it
They
out.
spend 10 times that every year to drain or to dredge out less than 10% of the
Yeah.
sediment that accumulates every year.
Yeah.
Like,
That sounds right. Why wouldn't you do that?
well, the scary thing is, like, they figured that it's already 60% full of dirt.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, and not to mention every other chemical and who knows what that's coming off of those farm fields down in there.
Oh, those
That's so
chemicals are perfectly safe, Katie. They're perfectly safe. They have no effect on human population whatsoever.
so crazy.
I got a
It's
bridge
so
for sale
crazy.
too, if you believe that was all true.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, we're talking about Colorado River and water in the West. And I think one of the big problems is Colorado River flows were vastly overestimated, or at least that's what they're saying now. Well, I mean, I can definitely buy that, we vastly overestimated the flows. And why wasn't that thought of in the first place? Like, okay, if we're saying the river flows this much, we don't
Mhm.
ever want to plan to take all of that water out of the river. And they
No.
allocated
Yeah.
every drop that was supposed to be in the river.
Yep.
And it turns out it's what, like 30 to 50% more water than is there on average.
Yeah. It's crazy. Well, and two, I just don't think again we're seeing so much less water in the system over time, and I don't think that there wasn't the hot topic of environmental change or all those discussions, if you will, of voice to facilitate some of that thought of, oh, hey, maybe we do destructive things to the environment, and hey, maybe we are going to have less water available. I think that was part of the major negligence in the calculus, in my opinion.
You want to know my hot take on what it's caused?
What?
Okay. So the Southwest that we diverted all the Colorado River to make irrigation in, New Mexico, Arizona. We greened the desert. We grow all kinds of crap down there. That was back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. Now what is it? It's desertified because overfarmed it. All the fertility's gone. We overgrazed it. I mean, there's places in New Mexico that lost 2 to 3 feet of topsoil in the last 100 years.
Mhm.
Okay,
Mhm.
cool. Before that, were there beavers there?
I would
What?
think.
I mean, I don't know, and I've never even been to Arizona, so I'm not even gonna like try to conjecture, but it's a thought. Like, were there beavers in the Southwest? Did they have water stopped up? Were they controlling the water cycle? What did it look like in Arizona in the 1700s? Like, was it green? Was there grass? Or has
Mhm.
it been a desert this whole
Mhm.
time?
Mhm.
I don't think we know, and I don't think we'll ever know. Just like, will we ever really understand if 60 million bison was a sustainable number for the plains or if they were headed for
Sure.
resource crash?
Sure.
Hard to say, but it's pretty easy to see that we've definitely broken the water cycle in the desert Southwest. And my thought is we've broken it so bad and it's so desertified and degraded. Now bear with me. It kicks up a lot of dust that gets picked up by trade winds and gets blown right over where I'm at, right over where you grew up.
Mhm.
And is that why we've been seeing? I would just call it. I wouldn't call it climate change or drought because the Southwest has been in drought for 15 years, but it's a creeping drought. So is that climate change? Are we settling into a new normal? And is it because we screwed up the Southwest so bad
Mhm.
that its effects are just going to keep creeping north and east?
This is an interesting conversation. So I was just talking to someone the other day about I need to dig that article up, but I found an article, and this individual I'd run into had read the same article as well about tree ring data from historical drought. And I know tree ring data can be highly variable, and there's all these arguments about it not being fully conclusive. But anyways, and it was suggesting in the Western United States, I can't remember how many years ago. It was like 300 or 400 years ago, something like that. Really long, far off, far past. There had been a drought that we, at the current percent, if you want to index it, I think we're at like 60 something percent of that drought, the historic drought level, right now in the American West. It was crazy. Um, and
That's
again,
really scary because I've got just over 25% of the precipitation I should have.
but what is I should have? Like what is that actually based off of?
Average of the last 140 years,
Well,
which means it's normal. What is normal besides a
right.
setting on a dryer?
Well, and part of this conversation we had was like, okay, we look at weather in like 5 year, 10 year, 25 year, 50 year, and it was interesting too, talking about how like short-sighted people in America are. Like we have no real history, like way back. And again, it's like, well, I wouldn't think it's that hard to imagine that there wasn't just this massive catastrophic drought that long ago. When you really think about it, like why are our thresholds measured in 150 to 200 years? Like this, it's been this country, this area has been around for way longer than that. Why couldn't there have been a worse drought even back then? And it was just an interesting thought. And her point was too, like, okay, every time that an extreme happens, it's the first time that it's maybe been documented in modern society, but it doesn't mean that it hasn't previously occurred at the same, if not a more extreme extent. It was just an interesting conversation with this lady.
That's an excellent point. It's kind of like everything that we're experiencing has already happened somewhere else in the universe
Yeah.
at some time. All this weather has happened before. It's just we might not have been here to see it.
Yes. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Um, and I really appreciate that. There's so many people that are like, "Oh, man-made cause climate change." You know what? I don't even think that the stuff we've done has even really started to affect the climate.
I think we're probably on the precipice of seeing really ramified effects in the future.
Well, we're getting close to time. We'll have to come back again in a couple of months and talk about how we can make it through the future. And with ranching in the future,
Yeah.
how to adapt our businesses to a changing climate.
Here we go. It's an excellent question. Everybody should be wondering all the time.
Yeah. So did I forget to ask anything today?
I don't think so. I feel like we we kind of pretty broadly covered the bases there. Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. And it's always great to visit with you.
Well, you too, Katie. I always, I've kind of been, if you have a fan club, I'd probably be a member. I've kind of been following you along ever since you knew Deb and Emery like there 3-4 years ago, and I met you out at Grass Fed Exchange in California. I've just been kind of keeping an eye on you, and I'm impressed with what I see.
Well, thank you. That's very generous of you. But I enjoy and appreciate the work that you're doing. I always think it would be a great thing to do, but I don't actually do it. So I appreciate you organizing people to try to create some change. So
I can't do sell by marketing either. So takes all kind of folks.
Maybe we could team up on something one day.
Maybe takes all kind of folk to make the world go round, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Anybody you want to give a shout out to?
Oh, yes. We were talking earlier, and Brian had a mistake in thinking that I was a talented gunsmith individual, and I am not, but he's actually thinking of my husband. And that was one thing we were talking about earlier too, is, living in these remote areas and these landscapes is just like and there's not these population centers, the families that we have that come along with us and doing undertaking maybe some of these tasks. But yeah, my husband Justin, he actually runs a gun business out of the house, and he's a gunsmith and an FFL and an SOT and whatever all the other acronyms are. So he's doing that here at the house, and we're trying to balance a wild 1-year-old and working outside and building guns and just living the Wyoming lifestyle, So anyways, we definitely couldn't do it without him.
Awesome. All right. So where can people go to get in touch with you or to find out more if they want to?
Oh, with me?
Yeah.
I am so email is honestly the best if you really want to talk to me. Katie, KATIE at barcross, BARCROSS.com. I do have social media, but I don't use it. So don't try to contact me there.
Okay.
Email.
Husband's Gun Business is on Facebook though, right?
Oh yeah. Well, he actually has a website. He's actually legitimate. He's 610defenseworks.com. So yeah.
I'll make sure I find a link to that and get it in the show notes for you.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you.
610
We keep saying
Defense?
we're going to do a ranch website because we have an internship that's it's grown quite a bit, but we don't have one. So no social media either.
Sometimes you're better off without it because there can be a lot of it can take up a lot of mental bandwidth that you're probably putting to work creating a lot more value.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and I did the whole Facebook and Instagram building and media marketing company with the beef company. And honestly, it was my least favorite part of the entire thing. And so anyways, when I came here, Jason was like, do you want to get a website? I was like, absolutely not. So
I've heard that music before. We're not playing that song.
Yeah. Yes. So anyways, well, thank you so much, Brian. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for your time today, Katie. So y'all gang, have a great week.
Thanks. You too. Bye.